All right, let's get started. In this briefing, we are deconstructing the hidden risks that are baked right into high-performance cultures. We're going to explore why that relentless drive for achievement can, paradoxically, lead to a total collapse. And, more importantly, what you as leaders can actually do to build success that lasts. So let's start with this central question. We all look up to figures like Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, right? We see that incredible hardest worker in the room ethic. But is that relentless drive really the blueprint for success we think it is? Or is it a burnout trap in disguise? This is the core paradox we're going to unpack today. And this really gets to the heart of the problem. There's this massive gap between the myth and the reality of high performance. The C-suite myth? It's the story we all tell ourselves. A relentless grind is how you win. But the clinical reality, well, that tells a very different story. Chronic stress actually degrades the very skills that leaders need the most, things like strategic thinking and self-control. This is the fundamental conflict we have to resolve. So here's how we're going to break this down. First, we'll get into the psychology of a high achiever, what I call the overdrive blueprint. Then, we'll look at the tightrope between pressure and performance. After that, we'll uncover the hidden organizational risks of a burnout culture. And finally, we'll give you a practical, actionable toolkit for sustainable leadership. Okay, let's dive into Section 1, the overdrive blueprint. Think of this as looking under the hood, analyzing the internal operating system that powers this extreme work ethic. So at the very core of this drive is what psychologists call type A behavior. You know the traits: impatience, fierce competitiveness, and this constant nagging sense of time urgency. Now look, this stuff is great for hitting big goals, for sure. But it also puts your body into a constant state of high alert. It's like a fire alarm that it just never, ever turned off. And that constant state of alert has a serious physiological price tag. Your body is just flooded with stress hormones like cortisol. And for an executive, the threat isn't some predator in the wild. It's the fear of being average, the fear of falling behind. This chronic state of stress just wears down your body's ability to recover. And believe me, it has serious long-term health consequences. So here is the crucial takeaway. The very same type A traits that fuel those short-term wins, that impatience, that time urgency, they are the polar opposite of what's required for long-term strategic success. You see, sustainable leadership isn't really about speed. It's about discernment. It's not about raw endurance. It's about strategic rest. Now, that brings us to Section 2, peaks and pitfalls. This is where we examine that incredibly thin line between pushing for peak performance and accidentally pushing your team and yourself right into overload. This chart here, it's a perfect illustration of something called the Yerkes-Dodson law. As you can see, performance actually peaks when there's an optimal amount of pressure, a state called eustress. That's when you're in the zone. But what happens with high performers is they often push right past that peak into distress, and that's where performance drops off a cliff. Stay in that red zone for too long and you hit burnout. It's inevitable. So you might be asking, what keeps leaders pushing so hard, right, into that distress zone? Well, a lot of the time it's high self-efficacy, that powerful, deep-seated belief in your own abilities, which has been fueled by all your past wins. And while that's a huge asset, it can also create a really dangerous blind spot, masking all the early warning signs of burnout until it's far too late. And this is where it gets really serious. Section 3. We're now escalating this analysis from the individual leader to the entire organization. We're going to show how these internal psychological states can actually become full-blown systemic threats. The first major risk is a concept called psychic flight. This is where intense, relentless work is basically used as a highly sophisticated avoidance mechanism. The grind becomes a way to escape what's called the burden of self-awareness, to avoid those quiet moments where deeper insecurities or major strategic uncertainties might start to bubble up. In this state, the leader isn't just building a company, they're building a fortress to hide inside. And make no mistake, this directly compromises strategy. Psychic flight, using work to avoid introspection, it narrows your focus to the immediate task, the next fire to put out, the next win. It actively prevents the kind of deep strategic reflection that is absolutely essential for long-term vision. True insight doesn't come from a packed schedule. It comes from protected, quiet space. Okay, the second systemic risk is something called ego-depletion. Now, the critical takeaway here is that your self-regulation, your ability to control impulses, stay focused, and make sound judgments, is a finite resource. I want you to think of it as your daily decision-making capital. Every choice you make, every email you answer, every impulse you have to suppress, it's a withdrawal from this very limited account. You can see it right here. All of your key leadership skills, from high-level strategic focus to day-to-day team management, they are all powered by the exact same limited source of mental energy. So when you spend way too much of that capital just grinding through the day, you have almost nothing left for the high-level thinking that actually moves the needle. And finally, there's the hidden risk of what's called cybernetic coasting. So after a huge success, the brain's internal feedback system often sends a positive signal that basically says, hey, we can relax now. We can self-indulge. For a high-achieving team, this post-success productivity dip can be absolutely catastrophic. It risks a total collapse in momentum right when you need it most to build on that big win. Okay, let's move into our final section, the Sustainable Leadership Toolkit. This is the strategic reset. This is where we provide an actionable framework for high performers to manage their internal state for genuine, long-term success. The whole process really begins with a crucial mindset shift. You see, most high performers act like these harsh judges, constantly passing a final verdict on their own self-worth based on their last success or failure. The shift is to become a craftsman at a workbench, objectively evaluating the action, not the actor, and constantly, dispassionately refining the process. The tool for this is a technique called verbal fabrication. It's a simple, four-step internal conversation. First, you isolate the limiting belief. For example, I am only valuable if I'm working. Step 2, you run the 24-hour test. If I actually held this belief for a full day, what behavior would it produce? Third, you reframe the issue from I am a failure to this action did not produce the desired result. And finally, you execute the reset. You consciously drop the unproductive thought. Think of it as mental hygiene for executives. So, it all comes down to this. We have to redefine what hardiness even means in a leadership context. True hardiness is not about how much you can endure. That is just a recipe for burnout. No, true hardiness is having the discernment to know when to push, when to recover, and how to strategically manage your single most valuable asset, your own mental and physiological energy. Which leaves us with one final critical question for you to reflect on. Take a hard look at your work, your drive, your culture. Are you truly building an empire that's designed to last for generations? Or are you building a fortress designed for you to hide in? The answer to that question will define your legacy.